welcome to the new episode of Life That Said Yes Conversations. And today our guest is Olive Bieringa, a dance, performance, and visual artist working at the intersection of social and creative practice, pedagogy, and healing. She's a certified movement therapist, a teacher and practitioner of body-mind centering, and a program director of Somatic Education Australasia. Welcome, Olive. You are many more things, but I decided if I read all of it, it will take half the interview. So maybe we mention the other things as we go.
Super. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So how are you feeling? How are you today?
I am feeling challenged by the world and kind of heartbroken and also just in wonder all at the same time. So I don't know. I feel like, yeah, like I'm carrying some fatigue in my own life from traveling and moving around a lot, but also just sort of amazing to find myself in new contexts and be with the complexity of human beings in lots of different contexts and sort of seeing the resilience or seeing the struggle and or being with those things inside myself. So I'm with all of those things today somehow. Yeah.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, now that you mentioned it, I always wondered when we feel challenged by the world, has there ever been a moment where we haven't been challenged on this planet?
True. And maybe the reality is also like or the changing reality of our day-to-day lives is also what we're able to disassociate from. So,
Exactly.
when are we more porous to all of the things? And actually, when are we able to also kind of put things in boxes or put some things to the side so that we can be more present with others? So, yes, very true, very real. Mm.
Mm. Yeah, in a way, maybe dissociation is a necessity to protect ourselves
Yes,
to some extent.
yeah, for sure.
So how to find that balance to be informed, but at the same time not to be flooded and drowned
Yeah, yeah,
by the negativity.
yeah. And maybe what is it to disassociate with awareness?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
To have that be part of our choice making process rather than it just being an unconscious process. Although maybe in some cases that's also very useful to be unconscious and not disassociating. So I'm I'm sitting with a wolf maybe today. So yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. So you collaborated for almost 25 years with Otto Ramstad as the Body Cartography Project. And you say that your mission is to engage with the vital materiality of our bodies and minds to create live performances that facilitate a re-enchantment of embodiment, relationship, and presence. So I was very curious about this word re-enchantment.
Mm,
What does
mm,
that mean to you,
mm,
and why did you use this particular
mm,
term in to describe your mission?
mm. Thank you for that question. I feel that a lot of the art that we make in the world, and I say we as in generally that artists maybe make in the world, is about sort of opening up the landscape even within the everyday to kind of open up different ways of perceiving, right? What it is that we're maybe seeing or hearing or smelling or tasting or touching or moving with. So there's something in that opening up of the landscape, opening up of the space between things that allows for a falling in love potentially. So even with the most mundane rock or the most, I don't know, the most common tree in your neighborhood, what is it that when we spend time and build relationship with these aspects of our environment, for example, can we, and then it could extend to, of course, animate, inanimate, alive, things that we don't perceive as living, but things that are still in their natural processes also. Like, how does it open up our relationship? So I think that this idea of re-enchantment is something that operates inside of a lot of artwork that is created. It may not be the primary goal for the artists that are making the work, but there's something about art making processes and the experience of being with an artwork that can really open up your perception, right? And transform your perception. So to be really tangible, I could say within our working practices with body cartography is that we've made a lot of work in different kinds of public spaces and different kinds of landscapes. And so what is it to really spend time with a stone or a tree that might be quite a common tree, not even an exceptional tree or a beautiful tree? And how does spending time with that tree actually open up my perception to more than what I assume about that tree? And how does that making time to be with this tree and understand how this tree is both traveling underneath me and traveling in, underneath me into the earth, and all the conversations and relationships it's having underneath me, and also then all the conversations that it's having above me in relationship to the weather and the birds and the insects, and then what are the pheromones that it's passing to the other trees around it, and what is the skin of the tree, what is the blood of the tree, what can I learn from this other being, and how in this process of spending time with and coming into relationship with, how does it change my being with all of the trees of that kind, or of all of the trees in my neighborhood, or of, right, my relationship changes then as I move through the landscape, as I move through the city, as I move through the forest. Like, so I think this idea of re-enchantment, specifically in relationship to the everyday, is so important to feeling into our aliveness as human beings, as animals, as creatures on this earth, and of being in love with being alive in a body on this planet at this moment when so many forces are really kind of stripping that from us, right? Or that systemically things are really pulling us away from living an embodied life, right? That it's not the value system that yeah, this moment is really holding up as a great way to live, and yet we know that's actually the only way to live well. So
Yeah. Yeah, so in a way, this re-enchantment is also includes the process of awakening the senses, right?
completely awakening the senses and opening up the perceptual kind of possibilities of how we understand who we are, where we are, who's around us,
Mhm.
how we're sharing life on earth with all of these other beings, and how our life is dependent actually on all of these other beings and the relationships we have. Because we're not here alone and we're not self-sustaining, right? We're completely dependent on the worms and on the bacteria and on the fungi and on the trees and on
Mhm.
the fish, yeah, and on the birds. So this field, I think, of opening up and falling in love with all of this life can really transform the way we can also, can transform behavior, can transform our sort of daily living in a sense,
Right. And in a
Mm.
way, make us more conscious and more humble, more aware of the interconnectedness.
Mm.
And I feel the somatic work can very much so help us in opening these channels and clearing the perceptual apparatus. And recently we were together in a senses and perception course, and I'm always reminded how, yeah, just by awakening the senses, how we can see the extraordinary in the ordinary.
Mhm.
And even the tiniest leaf and the tiniest stone,
Mhm.
they become so alive. And we realize that they are alive. They are a living pulsation, vibration. And then they start to communicate with us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that word also, cleaning or clearing, is also really important, right? Like even in that pulling out of the space to understand that your sensing is one task and then actually the perceiving is another task. And
Mhm.
that the way we kind of set ourselves up to sense that there's a whole premotor focus thing happening even before we're able to take in information, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And to then to parse out also the space between the information coming in and then how we perceive the information, that these are already, and then how that information as it becomes a perceptual interpretation, right, how it then goes on to affect how we then future in a few, in our future act of perceiving, or our future act of sensing, sorry, that this sort of clearing the space between those things can allow us to understand something about how we each do it, right? Like how we are each perceiving, sensing, and then also perceiving quite differently
Right.
based on different steps within this process, that there's something to kind of pull apart in there and question, I think, um, uh, how we do that. So
Mhm.
that it's not one clump, it's not one operation, it's not something to take for granted that you and I see the same color red, right? But actually we could
Right.
sit with that, right? Yeah. And then we can learn to share language and actually learn to communicate based on how we understand each person is then perceiving the world.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah. I think that's very important for our whole understanding of the educational process, would you say? Where I
Yes.
kind of feel that many times throughout our education, we are just expected to learn the information and take them, without questioning them.
Yes.
Whereas this kind of approach opens a whole different
Hmm.
ways of learning. Can you, as an educator, speak a little bit about this? How you feel about this?
Yeah, I think it is a radical, like re kind of positioning when we think of everybody in their diversity, right? And that each learning context, doesn't matter who's in the room, is a neurodiverse learning context.
Mm-hmm.
And that each person is hearing certain words and not other words, or experiencing certain parts of the teaching and not other parts of the teaching. And so what is the time we need? What are the different modalities that we need to bring into the classroom, if they're tactile things, or if they're movement oriented, or if they're, you know, about being, about listening, right? Or about seeing, like all of those things are possibilities in the classroom. And so how do we understand something about who our learners are so that we can kind of meet them in the most efficient way possible, or the maybe not efficient but generative way possible, that people are able to really, I mean, I think in this context that you and I were in recently within the program, it was so interesting to me to um yeah to be, I'm speaking English as a first language, so I also know, and maybe I should say also sadly as an only language too, right? So I'm also aware that often in those teaching contexts with body mind centering, there are many people who are speaking English as a second or third language, right? Like it's
Mhm.
not their mother tongue. And so just that moment in particular where I was reading a text and really trying to feel the timing of the registration of the text in people's bodies.
Mm.
And when the text is already becoming too much, like it's too dense, and and knowing, oh, it would be okay, I need to repeat this multiple times, or or when to pause when I'm reading,
Mm.
or when do I lose an awareness of what I'm reading? Like when am I not cognitively tracking? So this sort of these meta layers of awareness, and then asking people to tell me, oh, would you like me to read it? Yes. Would you like me to read it again? Yes. You know, like just doing that, and what would it be to kind of really take the time in that way. And I think that's interesting in somatic programs where things are being translated and
Mm.
people are also getting to hear something in their mother tongue and then in another language. That's
Mhm.
also very interesting how the work is landing when it's taught in your mother tongue versus,
Yeah.
you're meeting this American English, right? I say American, but just English. You're meeting this English language experience with a lot of kind of American content or references in a way.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think that's very interesting. And I've worked a lot with people with disabilities in different contexts. So, and then working now more recently also with babies.
Mm.
So, where it's not even that reliant on a kind of verbal communication process. Now I'm curious also to work more with animals. We have a pet, we have a gecko in our house, and so we're
Mhm.
in a process of building a relationship with this gecko and how we do that. But yeah, the like how do we meet different people and be able to improvise in a way or change the way we're doing something in order to be able to communicate more effectively. Mm. It's really a, a, a kind of um, that's a pleasure for me somehow. And I feel like I've always been interested in teaching also not to the lowest common denominator in the room, but also to the diversity in the room.
Mhm.
And so that comes really to me, like I trained in this DanceAbility work, which is working with dancers with and without disabilities. Alito Alessi created a body of work, excuse me, called DanceAbility. And at that time when I studied the work, the orientation of that work was really to start and meet people at the lowest common denominator. So if somebody could only move their eyes, we would use the moving of their eyes
Mhm.
as a kind of directorial score for somebody else's movement, for example. Yeah. Um, and then I became very interested in working in this sort of diverse context with people with and without disabilities with dance. Like, okay, if I have legs and you don't have legs, and I share a movement pattern with you or a choreography with you, and and then you adapt it because you don't have legs in a total, like you get to play and adapt this material somehow, and then you get to teach that back to everybody else. Like there's something so valuable in all of those different interpretations or translations of how the muscles in our bodies and the organs, and like how our different physical structures are able to adapt or compensate or take this thing and then make it your own. um, yeah, so I think I've always really been interested in that question of holding those, the kind of the different yeah, the different learners in the room, or the different ways people are
Mhm.
also um, actively kind of using adapting material in a way. So in a way, not even like as an educator, how do you share the principles, and then people sort of go, oh, well, this is what I want to do with them as a body worker, or this is what I want to do with them as a dancer, or this
Hmm.
is.
When I see the name body cartography, that's also very interesting for me.
Mhm.
Something very excited about making a map.
Mm,
It
mhm,
reminds me of those first explorers who
mm,
need to go somewhere,
mm,
discover the terrain, and then they make the map.
mm,
And then we share that map with others, but it's still only a map. People have to travel it themselves to get the embodied feeling of what it really is.
mm, mm.
Was that the idea behind the name or something like that?
I think the initial, like, I mean, yes, and maybe I could say more specifically, even this gap between the map and the experience,
Hmm.
um, and maybe even a like here's a map of this place as also a kind of colonial imposition in a way, or somebody else's
Hmm.
idea of what this place is, but then to be a body in this place, and to have a life in this place, or to have an experience in this place, like to really somehow honor the embodied knowledge, and how is the embodied knowledge sort of recognized in the process of map making? Of course, it informs the process of map making, but then there's also all of these agendas around power inside of the actual production of the map, right?
Right.
So there's something about, yeah, honoring the body's experience, as a kind of map making and as a kind of way of orienting, I think, through the world,
Mhm.
and then working in different kinds of spaces. Mm. So, yeah.
Right.
And that was, this work, body cartography's work. It's like the just to also maybe situate it a little bit, because it really started, in relationship to the somatic work and all of and dance and all of these kind of maps I felt like I was playing with and exploring through my dance and somatic training,
Mhm.
and in relationship to landscapes also in San Francisco, in the San Francisco Bay Area, and then also in New Zealand, in Aotearoa and Wellington, where I had grown up. So it was also something about making sense, a sort of a sense making process of these landscapes and of these places through my body, which had so radically changed from when I was growing up. Yeah, in particular in New Zealand, and then as a way of kind of building relationship to this new place I had moved to. Mm.
Mhm.
Mm.
And I feel throughout your life you have traveled a lot, right? And
Mm.
seen many diversities and many different landscapes
Mm.
and had a chance to embody them.
Mm.
I think that's one of the unique possibilities of human beings that we can embody anything and anybody. Do you feel that's true?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's amazing is that through our body, we also get to like embody really complex ideas, like
Mhm.
multiple concepts at the same time. And even if we can't generate language and argue for that thing, we can come to some kind of understanding of things, of different things. So, say, for example, the climate crisis. Like as an individual, I'm like, I don't know what my response is, what my job is, what I should be, how I could be. If I'm thinking collectively, it becomes a different conversation. But if I take that question also into my body and I move with it, there is some kind of sense making that comes out of the physical experience, whether it's like I'm taking in sensory information or I'm just taking in the concepts and the questions and I'm somehow moving with it, there's something that happens in that space. And so, is that an embodiment? I think partially, yes. And can we embody anything? We can embody lots of things. I don't know if we can embody everything, but I mean, for sure, we can embody lots of things as a way of really changing our orientation and our way of understanding other beings. Yeah.
Right.
And other things on the planet. Yeah. Other materials, other, and other thoughts, right? They don't even have to be things that have a material
Hmm.
body, but actually somehow embodying them allows us to give them a materiality to work with. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and I feel these practices have been used for ages,
Mhm.
even in spiritual work and meditation, and people looking at the pictures of saints or mandalas and taking in that into themselves. It somehow informs us and opens some kind of understanding and knowledge inside of us.
And I think, many, many, many indigenous cultures are living that way and operating and, that way through embodied practice.
Yeah, and now when we're talking about that, one of your projects was rewilding the commons.
Mm.
So you are talking about this need for rewildment. Is that the word? Rewilding?
Rewilding. Hmm.
Rewilding.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
haven't used that word for a while, but yes.
Yeah.
I mean, for sure, it's definitely part of our work. Yeah.
That's like also one of the ailments and conditions of modern man is this domestication. That we've been removed so much from that animal part of us and animal body. And going back to somatic practices and also some other rituals that I've been through in my life, one of the most empowering moments were the moments when I could really connect with this animal part and really feel like I turned into a monkey, a gorilla, or a bear, or a jaguar, and it was really coming from the body, coming from within. But it was that spirit, that consciousness that was fueling me, and I guess it can be a little bit scary to let go into that part of brain,
Mhm.
but it's also very liberating.
Well, sure. And I think how do we invite ourselves into these spaces? I mean, I used the word, the sort of colonial map making, and I didn't say on the other side we get to this place also where there is a kind of a decolonizing of the body, right? So what is the
Mhm.
difference between decolonizing the body and rewilding? Like that's an interesting conversation right there. I don't know. I feel like I need to unpack that a little bit more for myself, but for sure this place of rewilding or this place of like going under the social agreements,
Mhm.
right, that we have with each other to be in this very authentic,
Mhm.
just be with my gut tube, right? And like
Mhm.
be with my gut tube in this world, and how does that open up a completely different way of relating to others and relating to the world around myself, and I think going under, yeah, the cognitive thinking process to allow all kinds of different behaviors to emerge,
Mhm.
um, is a very powerful tool to have access to. And I think we get socialized out of that, right? Depending on the cultural conditions in which we're being raised, and how we want to be kind of received by those around us. Um, so to be able to open up experiences that allow that is very, very powerful. And I can say even last night, like I did this is, a little personal moment, but I did a brain spotting session yesterday, which
Hmm.
I've done it for the second time. I don't know so much about it. But then I had this experience that I was so tired, I fell asleep. And then I woke up and I was in the middle of like a total like autonomic nervous system releasing. My whole body was like moving around in my bed. Like I was thrashing and kicking and like it was kind of wild. And I I I was sort of half awake and half asleep while it was happening. And I haven't had that experience before. And I was in some ways, yeah, I feel really kind of excited that I was able to do some processing in that space of resting, like that I really needed somehow to have that opportunity, because I think often I'm teaching a lot or I'm holding the space for others also to be in these non-cognitive or uh to kind of open up opportunities for other people to be in this place. And then for myself it's like, how do I create those conditions for myself also, on a regular basis, not just on a special occasion when I have art funding, but like on a regular basis to be able to deeply enter these moments of yeah, whether it's this autonomic nervous system releasing, or it's like a rewilding, or it's just like already I feel like I can go there as a performer, as an educator, setting up conditions for people to play,
Right.
a lot. And then how can I also get that time and space too? So,
Mhm. Yeah, and I feel that's one of the maybe dangers of teaching a lot,
hmm
of constantly providing this space for others,
yeah,
and then afterwards really being too tired to go into our own processing.
yes. Yeah, and I would say that it's also true for people that are performing a lot as well. Like again, this kind of holding space as a performer for audiences or delivering at a certain kind of tone level and then not nurturing and kind of feeding
Mhm.
yourself in the way that you need to and to be able to sustain. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, when you mention performance art, I've never really been in that field,
Mm,
nor have seen many performances.
mm,
So, I'm wondering from your perspective what it is for you, and
mm,
why do you like it? Why do you do it? And
mhm,
what do you think it can bring to the world?
mm. Fantastic. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Um, I Again, just to give you some context, I grew up in a home that was very oriented towards, it was immersed in sort of visual art,
Mhm.
um, exchange on different levels. And I somehow so I grew up in a context of kind of criticality around contemporary art making processes, but mostly visual art. And so I got really interested in being like, okay, but what about the body? What about the body? What about my body? What about sort of sensuality, my experience? What about, so I grew up making. I was always making, and mostly I was like making sculptures and paintings and painting clothes. I was always making stuff, and then I also was making dances. So I was always making. That was a part of my childhood. Um, and then I think that the process of transitioning into saying, okay, I just want to work with the body now. Like I just would like to work with my body or our bodies as a place to make from, because I'm very curious about the body, but also I don't want to carry around all this other stuff. Like I want to just get essential somehow and more ecological in that way.
Mhm.
Um, and so then I began to learn about the body more or the body is such a strange terminology. I began to learn about bodies and minds and consciousness and, both through different performance practices, which were very improvisationally oriented. So I never trained in traditional ballet or modern dance. My training was very much oriented towards improvisational practices. And so somatics completely aligns with that because, in a way, when somatic work is taught well, it's not about imposing an aesthetic, and it's also not about a particular kind of body, right? It's really like everybody could access something from somatic work, and so there's a kind of everyone's welcome into this process. So for me, the process of art making became a process of facilitating audiences. It becomes a process of, like I could teach a class and a certain group of people will come. I can do a session and a certain clientele will come. I can do a performance and certain other people will come. I can perform in the theater, certain people will come to that. I could perform in a museum, a certain public would experience that. I could perform out in public space and other people will come to that. So for me, this is a way of thinking about facilitation in different contexts, which opens to different kinds of audiences. I could bring my performance work just to a center for performers with and without disabilities. I could bring my performance work into a school, or I could say I'm doing a workshop. So there's really a slippage for me in my practice between those possibilities. And a lot of the performance work that I have been focused on or making in the last maybe, I don't know, decade has been one-on-one performances. So one performer, one audience member.
Wow.
Right. So it's very much like a facilitated session that we would do in body mind centering. It's not so different in a way. And two, although it can be radically different depending on how it's done. And two, also these performances that allow the performers to really be like to begin, for example, also with a kind of somatic storytelling. So maybe I show you. So in a way, it's also like mining the pedagogical materials or allowing the pedagogical process in body mind centering to reveal itself in a performative context. So I show you a picture of an embryo and I begin to explain some aspect of the embryological story that I want to reveal to you. And as I'm showing you this picture, I begin to embody that thing inside myself. And then I begin to just unfold that into a dance. And maybe there's more language, maybe there isn't, but this kind of playing between the pedagogical frame, the language, the dancing. What is the dancing, right? Like it's movement. As a score. And so that's a kind of explaining the image or reporting from inside of the embodiment that I think is something, Otto, who is my collaborator for the past, I think now 26, 27 years, and my partner, who is also a teacher of body mind centering, like these are strategies that we've been developing together inside of our different projects that are completely coming out of or in conversation with the body mind centering teaching and teaching inside the program, as well as teaching a lot on Zoom, where you're more reliant, right, on the language and the precision and the articulation and kind of the failing of the words. So you keep also painting the image with your language to try and get all the different perspectives, of this moment.
Right.
And to try and weave everybody in. So there's something that really emerged very clearly after the pandemic around this practice so that's just to give you an example of this is an embryology performative work called a collection of, or fluid spaces, it's now called, that have been working on between Minneapolis and also Oslo and Norway. and it's part of the doctoral process that I'm also involved with. And then I would say this walking and talking, these one-on-one walking and talking, we have a version right now where we walk and talk about the weather through different landscapes. And that's part of a project called Resisting Extinction, which is also the other part of my doctoral process. And that work is really unfolding in lots of different landscapes. So I've just been in Poland to
Right.
do site research for a version that will happen there this summer, for example.
Mm.
So yeah, maybe you should come if you haven't been to see so much performance. It could be an interesting
Yeah.
place. I think there's an allowance within presenting art that is kind of beyond or outside of the frame. I'm not beholden to the curricula,
Mhm.
or beholden to the approach that I'm teaching. This is an artwork, so now I can also open up the 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 process, and it could go anywhere. It could serve many different purposes depending on what the intention of an artwork was. So there's something um, very, I think, liberating
Right.
in the kind of playfulness of art making that is quite
Mhm.
different also from like a therapeutic session or a class in a particular modality, right?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
sounds very wide,
Yeah.
that it's not just art performance or a class or a somat, it's all of it in a way
Yeah.
intertwining, and I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And yeah, I would just like to go back a little bit. I was really inspired when I read one of your interviews where you talk about this period from pandemic and working on Zoom a lot,
Mm.
and how you realized at one point that giving these Zoom sessions is also a performance space, and you use this term somatic storytelling. And I think that's my favorite part, what I really enjoy, using language and how to guide people with language. But it's also always it's not a language that we can set forever. It's every session is different and every context is different, but just this ability to create this space with the storytelling, and it can be in a live setting or a virtual space. It doesn't really make a difference. I mean, it is different, but it somehow transcends time and space, and I feel it also transcends words in a way. So maybe we could just talk a little bit about this concept from BMC, the mind of the room that we create.
Mhm.
And when we were in the practitioner program, that was very beautiful for me. Your first class,
Mm.
that was one of the biggest examples for me of the mind of the room, where I actually lost all cognitive registration of the words. I could hear they're just flying, but I wasn't really there with the words. But somehow I emerged out of that experience completely changed, with a different feeling of the body and feeling that the process has been done. It's been going on, even though I haven't registered the words in this conscious way.
Mm. Thank you for that feedback.
Yeah.
It sounds fun. I think that this um, process of a somatization, or like this terminology, and I don't know if you've gone over this term over and over again in the podcast, but this kind of space of speaking to the cells directly, like what has to get registered cognitively in order for something to happen. And actually, if the cells are just receiving and you don't even totally consciously understand or track everything that is being offered, and yet something's landing in you and something's unfolding in you, right? So uh, so this process of of yeah, and so in body mind centering, we use this word somatization to describe when somebody's delivering
Mm-hmm.
content, and usually in an oral way, so spoken, and people are, in their own processes around the room, and I think for me, one way that it kind of this somatic storytelling piece is like I started, I think, with what I would kind of call somatic storytelling, but then at a certain point, I think I was delivering also so much content, like so much information, and then kind of working iteratively and like painting this landscape and like maybe jumping a little bit also. Like it was a lot. It was really dense content. And for better or for worse. But it did open up a space where people then are no longer able to track
Mm-hmm.
consciously, and that something begins to happen, right? And so that's definitely for myself, I know, a strategy that is sometimes useful.
Mm-hmm.
And also it is very interesting to, I think, also holds, like, again, it speaks to sort of the diversity of the room, because you actually don't know what people are getting or what they know and what they don't know. And in some ways, you're following your own curiosity, and you're also embodying and trying to research live at the same moment, right? With some
Mm-hmm.
of this embryological material, for sure. Like I can know things really well and I can teach from what I know, but I could also teach what I'm curious about and what I would like to know more about. So I can kind of guide us into something, and then we're all in there researching together. So there's something about that moment that's really exciting. And I think I did a lot of that during the pandemic, kind of starting with what I knew, but maybe not necessarily knowing where we were going to end up, and allowing the research of the group to open up, new experiences for everybody. So there's something about that process of induction, which is also what's happening embryologically with the notochord. And so the yolk, it's like the yolk sac invaginates or folds in to create the gut tube. It's like induced by the notochord in the front, and the neural tube is being induced in the back. So I feel like I'm also kind of inducing some kind of
Mm-hmm.
knowledge building, or kind of a research environment that everyone will move towards in their own ways, in different ways, make their own very specific pathways or their own jumps, or fall into something potentially, in whatever way they do. And on Zoom, it's like so hard to track what's really going on, right? Like it's so bizarre, and so you talk maybe more than you need to. Or I speak for myself. I sometimes feel like I'm talking more than I need to hold the space, because I'm not necessarily seeing everybody. Mm. And so what's happening inside my body is the loudest, you know, which is natural anyway, but like what's happening inside my body in my space is the thing that I'm most aware of. And then maybe I'm getting visual feedback. But often, yeah, there's like a shared consciousness that is unfolding. But again, I can't assume that is true for everybody, because I don't actually know. But I'm trusting that everybody is there because they paid, like they had a desire to be there. They paid money, they showed up, and they're in something, right? So even
Yeah.
if they switch off and they're cooking their dinner,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like everybody
Exactly.
that's in the exploration is hopefully we're in it together. And if they're not, they would ask for more handles or more clues or call out to me or
Mm-hmm.
something. So it's a very interesting context, and it's also ethically very interesting because, and I think I've said this before in another interview, but like that moment where somebody also opens up so deeply, like the work opens up something so deeply for them, and they're in their own homes, surrounded by pictures of their grandmother or their ancestors, or they have a rebirthing experience on the side of the image, the side of the camera, like I can't see them, and I'm like, hey, are you okay over there? And then they're like, yeah, I'm just having a rebirthing moment. I'm great. Like all of these questions of like I can't do anything, like I can check up on them and I can check in with them later. And that wouldn't also probably be happening if they couldn't hold that space for themselves. So there's also something about the maturity of who's entering the process and what we're opening for ourselves and also for each other. It's very interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel the element of trust is kind of important, but also like this notion that everyone has to assume responsibility for their own processes. So resisting extinction, ecosomatic practices for living or dying on a damaged earth. There is a quote I would like to read. Just a second for me to find it. Aha. For many of us, embryogenesis, the development and formation of our embryonic selves from conception through the first 10 weeks of life, and death are hidden from view, unknown, barely recognizable, even forgotten, and yet they are universal experiences. Yeah, for some reason, this is a very important quote for me because, first of all this work with embryology has had such a profound impact on me. And I feel if we really get into this process of how we began, we are eventually unfolding towards the dying and decomposition. And I've noticed in society and in my own family and how death is always hidden. And there's this unhealthy desire to prolong life in artificial ways and really hide this aspect of dying. So I just think these are two very important subjects if we want to evolve as a humanity. And we need to embrace these two poles more deeply. So how does that reflect in your work and in this particular performance?
So I could say that in a way the quote is like the outline for the doctoral research that I'm doing, and that the two projects, so Fluid Spaces is the embryological research on one side, and Resisting Extinction holds a dying and decomposing practice on the other side. And so the dying and decomposing practice relates within resisting extinction to the idea of doing a somatization. And it begins with a group process for the audience to, they get given 3 different dying scenarios in relationship to the climate crisis. And one is freezing to death, one is dying of dehydration, and one is drowning. Drowning in relationship to a storm surge or a flood, etc. So the details of each of those scenarios is more full, but the audience essentially sits and discusses together what they would like to practice. And so some people move away and they don't want to practice anything, or they're really clear, I don't want to practice drowning. Like I'm not interested at all. And other people like, oh, I think we should practice drowning. So we have a discussion about what we should practice. And then we make a decision and we choose one. And then we go somewhere in the land that supports that scenario. So if we're by water somewhere, we might go to the water, or maybe we need to go to the top of a hill for freezing to death. Or maybe we find, a dry part of the landscape to do the dehydrating scenario. And so it is like a somatization except of course that it is a physiological kind of storytelling process. And so the focus of the texts are really what happens to our body through that process of dying of drowning, for example, and then what happens to our body if we're decomposing in the ocean or if we're decomposing in a cold lake. So
Mhm.
depending again on the context, I will match it to that landscape. Um, and it's about a 45-minute process, the somatization, and people are lying down and receiving this text. And some people get to really feel their own um, for some people, the dying, I can say in general, the dying part is challenging, but the decomposing part is often really wonderful and very deeply relaxing. So depending on who's receiving it, because it's different for everybody. For some people, it's an incredible like undoing, and for other people, it's just kind of horrific, and other people, it's quite beautiful. So uh, the the process of the dying into the decomposing is also one where some people fall asleep. Some people like feel their whole body resisting,
Mm.
like they don't want to feel those things. And that's also a real feeling. So this level of resistance is part of the also project, like feeling the resistance of the cells themselves dying
Right.
is our living, right? Like it is our life. And then to bring the dying piece back actually to the embryology, that in order to have fingers, these cells had to die, right? In
Mhm.
order to differentiate, dying had to already
Mhm.
exist at the embryological level. So for our heart to, become like two tubes that merged together to form one tube. The cells between those two tubes had to die in order for there to be one tube. So all of these processes of differentiation, like, in order to be born, we lose our placenta, which is our first organ, right?
Mhm.
It dies. It's buried in the earth or it gets thrown away or put in the freezer, whatever happens to it, we have to lose that organ in order to come into life on earth. So there's already a process of grieving, there's already a process of death that is inherent in our living. And as we walk in the forest, like, or somewhere where there's multiple living beings, our garden, it's like this is a process of things being metabolized. That the living is only there because of the dying, right? And it's true also within our own bodies. So somehow holding that, or learning to kind of practice being with that is part, I think, of living well in the middle, and also living in relation with, yeah.
Right, and also a strong, strong practice because I feel it faces us with maybe the greatest fear
Yeah.
that we have the fear of dying and letting go, but somehow it opens again a wide understanding that these deaths occur throughout our life.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the material and non-material aspects of our life, there is constant like this transformation,
Yeah.
something dissolving and something creating.
Yeah.
And I think the nature is clearly showing us that
Mm,
in every step,
mm,
and in
mm.
some places more than the others.
Yeah. Yeah. And that this, yeah, this sort of this ongoing processual nature of being a living being, right? That we're never finished, you
Yeah,
know? Yeah. Mm,
yeah, beautiful.
mm.
Okay, I think we can wrap it up.
Super. Okay, that was lovely.
Yeah, thank you,
Mm,
Olive. It was
mm,
beautiful to listen to
mm,
you
mm,
and
mm.
also to witness your teaching in person.
Mm.
Yeah, you are really a force of nature.
Oh, thank you so much. I
Yeah,
take that.
and a big inspiration.
Thank you. Thank you. And I hope to see you again in person.
Definitely, definitely.